The Black Plague killed 30% of Europe's population through vomiting, diarrhea, sepsis, and organ failure, but it didn't actually start in Europe at all. Rats, and especially rats traveling in ships, have long been blamed for spreading the plague, but this theory may be finally put to rest. For centuries, scientists have believed that infected fleas jumped from rats to humans in dirty, crowded towns, transmitting the infection and helping spread the plague. But researchers have been questioning this theory for some years now. For example, a 1986 paper published in the Journal of Interdisciplinary History points out that rats aren't mentioned in historical records of the plague, and they weren't as common in towns as one might think, at least not to the level required for the plague to spread so quickly. Even if infected rats arrived in ships, researchers believe that they would have stayed around the port area rather than making their way into cities. So if it wasn't flea-carrying rats that spread the plague, what did? A new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences points the finger at human lice and fleas instead.
The flea, its staple diet is blood. When it bites, it vomits plague bacteria into the bloodstream.
The speed at which the plague spread makes more sense if contagion was passed directly from person to person, as fleas jumped between members of a household, for example. One of the reasons the plague was so deadly is that it moved at alarming speed. At its worst, it traveled at a speed of about 24 miles a day, reaching new towns and cities faster than anyone could imagine. But the speed had little to do with the transportation itself. In the 14th century, people mostly used horses or walked long distances, covering an average of 20 miles a day. This means that the plague moved at their speed or even faster.
Pestilence over all the land. Is there no cure?
None.
Experts believe the movement of the plague through Europe in the 1300s was more likely connected to growing trade. With the Silk Route connecting continents over both land and sea, it was easier for the plague to catch a ride to foreign ports quickly. With cities growing, the plague was also able to infect larger populations, who then passed it on as they moved to other cities and towns or made pilgrimages. When the plague came back in the 17th century, it moved significantly faster than the 1300s Black Death. According to a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, this again wasn't a result of better transportation systems, but likely related to higher population density, poor living conditions, and even changes in the weather. We owe the word quarantine to the Italians, who during the Black Death implemented Trentino 30-day periods and Quarantino 40-day periods of isolation to try to protect their population. Both Milan and Venice had strict measures in place, but Milan in particular took things to a new level. According to a Washington Post article by historian John Muhal, Milan came up with a plan to isolate the sick, establish quarantine measures, and kept pilgrims and travelers outside the city gates. They also had doctors monitoring the health of the population and keeping death records. Another city that pulled out all stops when it came to fighting the plague was Dubrovnik, then known as Ragusa. Back in the 14th century, Dubrovnik was under Italian rule. It was part of the area that experienced a new outbreak in the 1370s, about 20 years after the original Black Death outbreak. In response, the city passed a law to force ships coming from known plague-infested areas to spend 40 days offshore, waiting out the infection cycle before they were allowed to disembark. By the turn of the century, the city also had health officers patrolling, guards at the city gate, a team of grave diggers, and a system to penalize those breaking plague laws. Most people associate the Black Plague with the 14th century pandemic that swept through Europe, but the plague had devastated the world long before, beginning in the year 541 AD with the plague of Justinian, which killed at least half the population of Constantinople before causing chaos all over the Mediterranean. Records from the time are vague regarding the death toll, but researchers think the Justinian plague may have killed as many as 100 million people.
Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
A 2014 study published in The Lancet confirms that the plague bacterium Yersinia pestis was responsible for all three of the major plague pandemics: the Justinian plague, the 14th century Black Death, and a third pandemic in the 19th century. In fact, cases of bubonic plague are still found throughout the world. Between the years 1970 and 2020, the CDC reported 496 cases of bubonic plague infection in the US, mostly in western rural states.
Get that to the lab and call a CDC. Tell them what? That we have a patient with the plague.
Although the bubonic plague can now be treated with common antibiotics, deaths still occur. In 2021, there were over 100 cases and 13 deaths in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and around 60 suspected and confirmed cases in Madagascar, where the plague causes up to 700 infections every year. Plague doctors with their bird-like beak masks and head-to-toe black outfits are hard to ignore, and so are the descriptions of them walking the streets of medieval cities to attend the infected. But plague doctors didn't exist during the Justinian plague or even the 14th century Black Death pandemic. They actually didn't appear in literature at all until the 17th century, when physicians started wearing the costume in an effort to protect themselves against infection during an outbreak of the plague in Paris.
The Europeans settled on this look in the 17th century, proving they could even deal with the plague more stylishly than we could.
The outfit is credited to royal physician Charles de Lorme, who in the early 1600s designed a seemingly impenetrable costume that consisted of a coat covered in wax, tall boots, goat leather hat and gloves, and a long rod they could use to push away the infected if they got too close. The most famous part of the outfit, the beaked mask, was actually hollow, so doctors could insert theriac into it. This mix of herbs and medicinal compounds was supposed to filter out the infection and protect the plague doctors. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. That's because doctors weren't looking to filter out bacteria, but evil smells, which they thought were making people sick. The Black Death was so deadly that for years scientists believed it killed indiscriminately, taking the young, the old, women, men from all walks of life. But a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences revealed that this actually wasn't the case. When scientists looked at the remains of London's East Smithfield Black Death Cemetery and compared them to skeletons pre-plague, they discovered the disease had actually been quite selective. They found that out of the almost 500 skeleton study, many showed signs of frailty, lesions of the skeleton, malnutrition, and changes in the bone that could indicate stress or prior infection. From this, scientists deduced the plague was more likely to kill people who were already in somewhat poor health when they were infected. But at a time when not even simple diseases could be treated because of a lack of medications, frailty could affect anybody, even the young. The 14th century was a time of superstition mixed with intense religious belief, so it's no surprise that the population proclaimed the plague a punishment from God. To be saved, believers thought they needed to ask forgiveness and cleanse their environment. This penance took many forms. Processions of traveling flagellants beat themselves in public to save different towns. Meanwhile, the massacre of Jews in Germany in the years 1348 to 1349 was because they were blamed for the spread of the disease, according to a paper published by Brigham Young University.
God's grip on his people is loosened. We must ensure the flock is not tempted to look beyond God and church for answers.
While peasants might have been swept up in their punishment theory, doctors relied on medicine to deal with the plague. But 14th century medicine was based on the theories of humors, where all diseases were connected to bodily fluids such as blood, bile, and phlegm. With little medication at their disposal, all doctors could do for plague victims was prescribe things like burning scented wood, bathing in rose water, and bloodletting to fight the miasma, or bad air they believed was causing the infection.
Fear was compounded by ignorance. Some believed the disease was transmitted by sight. Others that merely thinking about it would bring death.
Although the Black Death ravaged Europe, it actually started in Asia years before it arrived on the Italian coast. More specifically, historians believe the plague spread along the Silk Road, a series of roads and trade routes, both on land and water, that connected China with Europe and Turkey. In a new 2022 study published in Nature, scientists have identified what could possibly be the origin of the plague strain in Kyrgyzstan, where DNA from bones dating back to 1338 tested positive for Y. pestis, the bacterium that causes the plague. The ancient Central Asian strain found near the Tian Shan Mountains could provide a definitive answer regarding where the plague originated. During a few devastating years, the plague spread all the way from Asia to the Middle East and Northern Africa, where it likely killed as many people as it did in Europe. German scientists also found evidence of the plague in 1346 in Russia's lower Volga regions. This was a year before it reached Europe, confirming at the very least that the plague arrived in Europe from the east. Researcher Gerard Chouin of William and Mary University is adamant that the 14th century Black Death also reached sub-Saharan Africa, killing millions along its path. Historical sources are less accessible in that area, and Chouin continues to search abandoned settlements and other archaeological finds to confirm his theory. Not much has been written about the deaths of animals during the Black Death, but there's no doubt they died alongside farmers or pet owners back then. The CDC lists animals that can be infected with the plague, including squirrels, mice, and rabbits. Cats can catch it by eating rodents, and there were farm animals to worry about, as the plague infected cows, pigs, and chickens, and anybody dealing with them. In fact, so many sheep died during the plague that Europe suffered a significant wool shortage for years afterwards. In the book The Decameron, 14th century Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio describes two pigs smelling the clothes of an infected person, then dying on the street soon after. And in her book, The Black Death, Rosemary Horrocks shares how Franciscan Michele de Piazza noted that not just one person in the house died, but the whole household, down to the cats and the livestock, followed their master to death. Speaking about the Justinian plague, Greek historian Nicephorus Gregoris wrote in The Black Death, the great mortality of 1348 to 1350, the calamity did not destroy men only, but many animals living with and domesticated by men. I speak of dogs and horses and all the species of birds. The plague made 3 major appearances throughout history and had a different name each time. The first recorded instance of the plague in 541 AD is known as the Justinian Plague, named after Byzantine Emperor Justinian I. This plague devastated Constantinople and killed millions, but it seems to have mostly disappeared by 590. When the next major plague pandemic happened in the 14th century, it was simply known as the pestilence. There are theories about the origin of the name, including the possibility it referred to the hemorrhage and gangrene that sometimes developed from its severe infection. The name Black Death doesn't appear on the record until many centuries later. In the book The Complete History of the Black Death, author Ole Jorgen Benedicto theorizes that the name could be from the Latin expression atra mors, with atra meaning black or terrible, and mors meaning death. But the name was being used by other scientists at the time, including French physician Simon de Covino, who called it mors nigra, or Black Death. There's no official name for the third plague outbreak, though 19th century sources in both English and Spanish literature often refer to it as the Black Death, too.